She picked up her aunt's mop and walked into the Celestia's gilded presidential suite, only to freeze as the hotel's billionaire guest stared her down. In a single glance, he assumed she wasn't a cleaner, but a secret indulgence he'd paid for. Her uniform should have made her invisible yet in that opulent room. Every whispered assumption laid bare a hidden injustice. What happens next? If you've ever felt a single look can carry a world of judgment, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below, because every story uncovered reminds us why human truth matters more than wealth. Rain washed over Manhattan that evening, turning streets into glistening mirrors of neon signs and yellow cabs. In a cramped studio apartment near Columbia University, Rachel Moreno sat hunched over her textbooks, the glow of a single desk lamp illuminating dense pages of anatomy. Her fingers trembled with fatigue, but she forced herself to read one more line. A full scholarship hinged on these hours of study. When her phone buzzed, she braced for another flashcard reminder or an email from her study group. Instead, a text from her Aunt Teresa appeared. "Can you cover my shift at the Celestia tonight? I twisted my ankle. It's urgent." Her heart sank. Teresa's job as a housekeeping attendant at that five-star hotel in Midtown paid for their rent. Rachel could not refuse, even though every fiber of her being rebelled at leaving the books that might shape her future. She traded her sweatpants for the uniform, a fitted navy polo, black slacks, sensible shoes, and tucked her medical ID badge into her pocket. Outside, the rain battered her umbrella, and she hurried down 53rd Street, toward the Celestia marquee glowing like a beacon of privilege she'd rarely seen. Inside, the lobby's marble floors and crystal chandeliers seemed to hum with quiet power. Guests in designer coats drifted past without glancing at the uniformed staff. At the reception desk, the night manager, Ms. Caldwell, handed Rachel a stack of room keys and whispered, "You're covering Suite 6001, the presidential suite. Do not let anyone in." Her tone carried both authority and a hint of warning. Rachel nodded, swallowing her nerves as she ascended the grand staircase. The corridors grew hushed, carpet muffling her footsteps. When she reached the door to Suite 6001, the number shone in polished brass. She paused, inhaled, and slid the key into the lock. The door swung open to a world of gilt and silk plush armchairs faced a roaring marble fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering skyline. A thick wool rug muffled every step as she lifted her cloth and began to dust the mantel. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, expecting another attendant. Instead, she saw a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit. His dark hair was trimmed close, and his gaze cold. Appraising rested on her as though she had wandered into his private domain uninvited. Without a word, he took a step forward. Rachel froze. Her mind scrambled. She was just doing her aunt's job, following instructions. Yet something in his posture spoke louder than any accusation. He raised a manicured hand and said, "You shouldn't be here." His voice was calm, but edged with suspicion. She swallowed hard and managed, "I'm the replacement for Teresa." He cut her off. "This is the presidential suite. No replacements, no exceptions." He reached into his jacket pocket as if to call security. Rachel's blood pounded. Her eyes darted to the fireplace poker at her feet. She swallowed again, clinging to composure. A distant thunder rolled outside. The city skyline flickered as if in sympathy with her panic. She stepped back, clutching her cleaning cloth like a shield. "I'm doing my job," she said, voice trembling. He studied her uniform, the hotel logo across her chest. Then he shrugged, expression unreadable, and said, "Then prove it." She opened her mouth, but words failed. The silence stretched. He narrowed his eyes, and the hush in Suite 6001 felt as heavy as the rain outside. She didn't look back, but he knew something had changed. The morning sun had just begun to warm the sidewalks of Manhattan as Rachel Moreno stepped off the M79 bus, her shoulders still damp from last night's rain. She clutched a slim folder of lecture notes and eyed the building ahead, Crosstech headquarters, a glass tower that seemed to pierce the sky. Despite her lingering embarrassment, curiosity propelled her forward. She had no business here, but a question burned in her mind. Why did Nathaniel Cross hesitate when he first saw her at the Celestia inside the lobby? Security badges scanned her aunt's name. A receptionist directed her to the basement archives, where files older than most interns waited in metal cabinets. Rachel's pulse quickened. She reminded herself she was here to help Teresa, to clear her aunt's reputation. She stepped into a dim room, humming with air conditioners. Dust motes drifted in shafts of light. At a long table, Rachel unpacked her folder. She rifled through contract pages and payroll records. A misplaced stack of photographs tumbled out. One, sepia-toned and curled at the edges, caught her eye. It showed a younger Teresa in Crosstech's lobby, smiling beside a uniformed doorman. Behind her, a poster read, "Grand Opening Crosstech Plaza." Rachel's breath caught. She traced her finger along her aunt's profile. This was from 2 decades earlier, long before Rachel was born. A sudden voice startled her. "You shouldn't be here." It was the same calm but firm tone she remembered. She spun around to see Nathaniel Cross himself, arms folded, watching without surprise. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something like recognition. "I found this," Rachel said, holding up the photograph. "It belongs to my aunt." Her voice wavered between accusation and hope. "She worked here before I was born." Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I remember Teresa." He reached for the photograph but paused. "She was part of our opening team. She kept things running behind the scenes." Rachel felt a tremor of pride and indignation. "Then why did you treat me as an intruder last night?" She lifted her chin. "Why assume I was something I'm not?" He hesitated. His jaw tightened. "I acted on an assumption. I didn't recognize you." He glanced down at the picture, then back at her. "Teresa was respected. I'm sorry I doubted you." Her anger flared, but she caught herself. The familiar ache of skepticism rose. "Your sorry won't fix how I felt humiliated in that suite. I lost more than respect. I doubted myself." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I understand." He tucked the photo into his jacket. "I need to make this right." He took a step back, then extended an envelope across the table. Inside was a note and invitation to dinner, handwritten, no titles, no protocol, just his name. Beneath it, a simple phrase, "Help me understand." A surge of emotion flickered across Rachel's face. Disbelief, resentment, curiosity. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. His posture was open, vulnerable. The difference between them, a billionaire and a scholarship student, seemed less vast than last night. Yet a gulf remained. The overhead lights hummed, and somewhere a clock chimed. Time had shifted. Rachel weighed the invitation. She could walk away, let the misunderstanding stand, or accept and risk exposing herself to another round of judgment. She folded the note carefully, her knuckles white. She met his gaze and said, "I'll think about it." As she turned to leave, Nathaniel called softly, "Don't go yet. There's something else you should see." She paused. Against her better judgment, she looked back. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Rachel Moreno found herself standing before the mirrored glass doors of Crosstech's Midtown headquarters. She straightened the collar of her navy polo, the fabric still crisp despite last night's rain, and reminded herself she was not here as a mistake. A voice on the phone had summoned her. Nathaniel Cross wanted to talk, face to face. She had agreed without fully understanding why. Inside, the lobby stretched wide, marble floors reflecting rows of revolving doors and a sculptural installation of stainless steel beams. A security officer nodded at her hotel badge pinned to her chest. She mounted the escalator to the main reception area, her shoes clicking on polished steps. Every step echoed in her chest. At the top, she spotted Nathaniel waiting. He stood tall beneath a sculpted chandelier, hands in the pockets of his tailored trousers. The crowd of employees and visitors parted as she approached, and the murmur of conversation faded. For a moment, the grand lobby felt still, as though the building itself held its breath. The contrast was startling, Nathaniel's expensive suit and composed posture against Rachel's simple uniform and churning nerves. He offered a polite smile. "Thank you for coming, Rachel." His voice sounded softer than she expected. "Please, follow me." He led her through a hallway lined with modern art by Brooklyn painters, bright abstracts that seemed to pulse with energy. Rachel felt uneasy. She had never considered herself part of this world of wealth and ambition. They reached a quiet conference room, its glass walls overlooking a tangle of steel and concrete. A long mahogany table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. He gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself into a chair, fingertips grazing the cool surface. She cleared her throat. "You said you wanted to explain?" Her voice was firm despite the flutter in her chest. Nathaniel took the chair opposite her. He slid a folder across the table. "I owe you an apology." Inside were notes from security footage and housekeeping logs, showing that she had indeed been assigned to Suite 6001. "I acted on assumptions instead of verifying," he said, gaze unwavering. "That was unfair to you and, frankly, disrespectful." Rachel stared at the papers. Shame and relief tangled inside her. Shame for doubting her own worth. Relief that someone as powerful as Nathaniel admitted a mistake. She set the folder aside. "Thank you for acknowledging that, but it went beyond a simple error. You made me feel out of place in my own skin." He nodded. "I see that now." He paused as if choosing his next words. "I've reviewed Teresa's history here. She was valued for decades. I regret I didn't recognize her granddaughter's dedication." His admission warmed her chest, a small flame of hope flickering. Rachel pressed her lips together. She wanted more than an apology. She needed understanding, respect. "My aunt works to support her family. I cover her shifts so I can focus on my medical studies. Every hour she spends here is an hour I could be in a lab or library." Her voice rose with emotion. "I don't deserve to be treated like an intruder." Nathaniel's expression softened. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. "You're right. You deserve better. I want to make amends." He retrieved a pen and slid a sheet of paper toward her, a slip, granting her and Teresa permanent access to any cross-tech event as honored guests. No more late-night scrubbing in the dark. Consider this a formal invitation, not as staff, but as family of the company's legacy. Rachel's breath caught. Family of the legacy. Those words meant more than any title. Her heart fluttered between gratitude and disbelief. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us show you respect," he said quietly. "Say you'll come to our community forums, our training sessions. I want you side by side with us, not hidden behind dust cloths." She studied his face. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering partnership. She remembered how he stood in that suite, suspicion in his eyes. Now he looked at her with sincerity. She felt the weight of social barriers shift beneath her feet. Before she could respond, the room's intercom crackled. A secretary's voice announced an emergency board meeting in 20 minutes. Nathaniel sighed, checking his watch. He rose and extended his hand. "Walk with me," he asked. "I'd like to show you something." Rachel took his hand, standing. Together they exited the conference room, stepping back into the lobby's hush. Employees paused to watch them pass. Rachel no longer alone in her uniform, but accompanied by the man who had once dismissed her. As they headed toward the elevators, she hesitated just outside the silver doors. She turned to Nathaniel and asked, "What will happen next?" He met her gaze and offered a small, hopeful smile. "That depends on whether you choose to trust me." She didn't answer immediately, her mind racing. Then at last, she stepped forward and pressed the button. Rachel waited beneath the ornate ceiling of the Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel, its stained glass skylight glowing in soft morning light. Rain from yesterday's storm still clung to the window panes, and the polished mahogany tables gleamed against cream-colored walls. She smoothed the hem of her navy polo, feeling out of place among tuxedo diners and linen-clad waiters. When Nathaniel Cross arrived, he wore a tailored navy blazer over a white shirt, his posture confident yet not unkind. He offered a brief nod, then guided her to a corner table beneath a bronze chandelier. The hum of conversation swirled around them, but between their chairs, an invisible gulf beckoned. He unfolded the menu and glanced at her. "They have eggs, Benedict, or smoked salmon," he said. His tone was casual, but Rachel sensed an undercurrent of unease. She managed a small smile and said, "Whatever you recommend." He ordered for them both, and they settled into silence. The scent of fresh coffee and toasted brioche drifted across the table. Silverware clinked as a server placed china plates before them. Both pretended normalcy, but each glance carried the weight of the previous night's confrontation. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Tell me about Columbia," he said, breaking their quiet. "How is the anatomy lab this semester?" Rachel paused, fork hovering over her plate. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she considered whether he truly cared or was simply making polite conversation. She described her lab projects, the late nights spent dissecting cadavers to prepare for her scholarship interview. Her voice was measured, determined, but it lacked warmth. Nathaniel listened, nodding, though his gaze drifted to her uniform. When her plate arrived, a delicate tower of poached eggs balanced on English muffins, Rachel hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to luxury dining. A single egg slipped, yolk spilling onto the plate. She met his eyes, embarrassed, but he reached forward and placed a napkin beside her plate. She caught the gesture and whispered, "Thank you." He offered a slight smile, but his eyes flashed with something akin to regret. Midway through the meal, Nathaniel leaned forward and uttered words that pierced the hush between them. "Have you ever wondered what life would be like if you'd never had to balance books and scrub floors?" His voice was soft, but unguarded. The question landed like a stone thrown into still water. Rachel froze, fork midair. He seemed unaware of the implication that he assumed her life had been defined entirely by duty and sacrifice, that she lacked any choice. Her chest tightened. Each word felt like a verdict. People like you belonged on the margins. She swallowed hard, pushing her plate back. A rush of anger lurked just beneath her calm. She wanted to shout that her life was rich with purpose, not defined by hardship. Instead, she drew in a ragged breath and said, "I chose this path." Her voice trembled but refused to break. Silence settled as waiters hovered, uncertain. Nathaniel's eyes widened in sudden awareness. He sank back in his chair, brow furrowed. He rubbed the back of his neck as if bracing himself. "I'm sorry," he began, but the words caught in his throat. He closed his mouth, staring at the tablecloth. The apology remained unspoken. Guilt flickered across his features. He had crossed a line and knew it. Yet he seemed unsure how to bridge the chasm he'd opened. Rachel rose abruptly, chair scraping wood. She gathered her napkin and laid it on the table, untouched. Her uniform felt heavier now, weighed down by the reminder of how different they were. She met his eyes one last time, her own shining with hurt and defiance. Without another word, she walked away, leaving him alone among the hush of polished floors and fading sunlight. The second-floor service corridor at the Celestia was quieter than the grand lobby, its red carpet muffling footsteps and stretching down toward the guest suites. Rachel Moreno pushed her mop bucket along the wall, droplets of water swaying in time with the slow hum of the air conditioner. She paused at the oil painting of Manhattan's skyline, her reflection ghosting on its glass frame. A sudden vibration in her apron pocket made her reach for her phone. Teresa's name flashed on the screen with a simple message, "You're doing great. Be proud." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. She remembered the yellowed letter her mother left before she died, a single sheet of ivory stationery with neat cursive, "My hope is in you." She pressed her thumb against the words. Her vision blurred and she closed her eyes, clutching the damp cloth in her hand. The memory of her mother's final embrace returned, the steady warmth of her heartbeat fading into the emptiness that followed. A tremor ran through Rachel's shoulders. She inhaled, willing herself to breathe. When she opened her eyes, Nathaniel Cross stood at the corridor's end. He held a bottle of spring water, its label catching the flicker of the overhead lights. He advanced without a word, stepping over the edge of a rich burgundy rug. His tailored trousers creased at the ankle as he reached her side and held the bottle out. She hesitated, then accepted it, the cool plastic wobbling between her fingers. "Thank you," she said, voice low. He nodded once, eyes fixed on her. For a heartbeat. The distance between billionaire and scholarship student collapsed into something simpler, two people sharing a moment of kindness. Rachel took a slow drink and felt relief spread through her chest. The corridor walls, lined with portraits of cityscapes, closed in less oppressively. Nathaniel leaned against the opposite wall, folding his arms, the water bottle still in her hand. His gaze flicked to her hands, then to her face. "I admire your strength," he said. His tone was gentle, almost hushed, as though he feared speaking too loudly would shatter the quiet. Rachel blinked, surprised. Admiration from him felt foreign. She lowered the bottle and paused, tears threatening to spill. "My strength is my only choice," she replied, voice catching. She tapped a finger against the bottle's label. "It's what keeps me moving forward." Nathaniel's expression softened. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder. He placed it on the carpet between them. The folder bore the insignia of Columbia University's Scholarship Committee. "I saw this," he said, nodding toward the folder. "Your application. They granted you a full scholarship." Rachel's heart kicked. She sank to one knee to examine the documents. Though she needed no proof the letter from Columbia had arrived weeks ago, she had kept it folded in her backpack, afraid to hope. She pulled out a certificate printed on heavy paper. Her name glowed in elegant script, Rachel A. Moreno. "You did this yourself," Nathaniel continued. I didn't realize until now how much you've already accomplished." He hesitated, looking at the scholarship letter as if seeing it for the first time. "I only knew you as my aunt's replacement. I never stopped to think you were the real thing, a student, a future doctor." Rachel felt her cheeks burn. There was pride in his recognition, but also sorrow, because it had taken so long for him to look beyond her uniform. Memory of his earlier assumptions flickered across her mind, how he had judged her by her role, by the dust she swept. A stab of hurt knifed through her chest. She rose and clutched the scholarship letter to her heart. "I've been carrying this," she whispered. "It's everything I've worked for. It doesn't come from cleaning rooms." Her voice trembled. "It comes from years of study, from nights like last night when I should have been here." Nathaniel's gaze dropped to the carpet. He ran a hand through his hair, as if unsettled. "I'm sorry," he said, the apology small but sincere. "I never meant to diminish your efforts." She closed her eyes and let the silence stretch. The corridor lights cast soft pools of illumination around them. The red carpet seemed less like a barrier and more like a road they could walk together. A distant bell rang, signaling the end of a housekeeping shift. Nathaniel tucked the folder back into his jacket. He extended his hand, the water bottle forgotten. "May I walk you back?" Rachel met his eyes, searching for honesty. He nodded, hopeful. She placed the scholarship letter into her apron pocket and accepted his outstretched arm. As they began to walk, Nathaniel's gaze slid to the painting on the wall, a sweeping view of the East River at dusk. "And one more thing," he said, glancing back at her. "I want to help more than just lend an apology." She paused mid-step, curious despite herself. Nathaniel offered a small, determined smile. As they reached the stairwell entrance, her pulse quickened, wondering what he meant. She didn't look back. But he knew. Something new had begun. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Dragon Ballroom at the Celestia, casting long rectangles of gold across polished oak floors. Staff bustled about, arranging tables for the charity luncheon. Crystal chandeliers gleamed overhead, and the scent of fresh lilies mingled with a faint aroma of coffee from the catering station. Nathaniel Cross stood near a stack of wooden crates filled with white roses. He wore a crisp shirt and dark slacks, sleeves rolled up at the forearms. Across the room, Rachel Moreno hovered by a trolley of candles and tapers, her navy polo contrasting with the soft pastels of table linens. An organizer approached them in muted tones and said they needed help checking stage lighting and floral arrangements. Without hesitation, Nathaniel grabbed one of the crates and offered it to Rachel. She lifted it carefully, arms straining slightly under the weight, and together they carried the roses across the room. Nathaniel guided her toward the dais where a small platform had been built. Layers of fabric spilled over its edges, disguising sound equipment. He pointed at a low spotlight aimed at a podium. She knelt down on the plush burgundy carpet and adjusted the cable loop. He set his crate down, opened the lid, and handed her a bloom. The petals were cool and velvety. She pressed the stem into the crystal vase at the center of the stage. As she worked, he arranged a row of battery-powered candles along the platform's edge, meticulously straightening them so each flame would flicker in unison. Neither spoke. The hum of conversation and the soft thud of chairs being moved around the hall filled the silence. When the crate was empty, Rachel straightened and noticed a few petals scattered on the floor. One flower bent at an awkward angle, its bloom barely open. She reached down and gently lifted the petal to place it back in the vase. He moved closer without prompting, his footsteps barely audible on the carpet. Very deliberately, he lifted the broken bloom, removed its stem, and replaced it with one more perfect rose. His fingers brushed hers as he passed the flower, and for a moment, neither of them gave voice to the tension between social worlds. Rachel looked up and realized she was smiling. It felt like the first true, unguarded expression since she'd arrived at the Celestia. She placed the repaired bouquet at the podium and stepped back. Her cheeks warmed, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Nathaniel watched her, eyebrows lifted in quiet surprise. His lips curved into a gentle smile of his own. Music began to drift in from speakers behind them, a soft piano melody that would greet the arriving benefactors. Nathaniel stood beside Rachel as the first notes filled the ballroom. He hesitated, then turned to her. "Will you stay for the luncheon?" His voice carried in the hush that settled between potted palms and linen-covered tables. Rachel's heart fluttered. The invitation was simple, but it carried weight. To stay would mean stepping out of the service corridor and into the public eye of donors and dignitaries. To remain would require her to trust him, not to reduce her to a curiosity. She folded her arms, then crossed and uncrossed her hands, her gaze drifting to a row of candles that now glowed like tiny promises. The staff began to line up at the entrance, opening doors for the first guests. Nathaniel offered his arm with an unspoken hope. Rachel looked at it, then back at him. The question hung between them, like the chandeliers above. Would she step forward or retreat to safety? Behind them, a server paused and leaned toward a colleague, voice low enough that only they could hear. Something about the two of them, the way they moved in tandem, suggested something beyond routine tasks. The server's gaze lingered a moment longer before he set down his tray of hors d'oeuvres and disappeared into the crowd. Rachel inhaled, the scent of roses still fresh in the air. She lifted her chin and met Nathaniel's eyes again. The world beyond the stage seemed to hold its breath. The music rose, and with it, the moment of decision. She nodded, small and resolute, and slipped her hand into the space he offered. She didn't look back, but he knew something had shifted. The chandeliers of the Dragon Ballroom sparkled like a constellation overhead, as diners in evening attire drifted among linen-draped tables. Crystal glasses caught the light, wine glowed like garnets, and servers in black vests moved with practiced efficiency. At the far end, Nathaniel Cross stood beside a carved mahogany lectern, greeting donors and trustees of the Cross Foundation. Rachel Moreno entered on his arm, her navy polo exchanged for a borrowed wrap, the uniform left behind for a night. She felt each gaze as a weight admiration, curiosity, judgment. Teresa's voice echoed in her mind. Keep distance. Protect yourself. Her aunt had arrived early and placed a gentle hand on Rachel's elbow in the hallway. Remember who we are, she had whispered, eyes flicking toward Nathaniel's tailored sleeve. Don't let them forget. Rachel had nodded, steadying her breathing. Now, the ballroom glowed around her like a gilded cage. A woman in pearls approached and whispered into Nathaniel's ear. He nodded, then passed a smile to Rachel that felt strained. She returned it, her heart catching in an awkward flutter. Nearby, a longtime benefactor murmured to his neighbor, "I trust his judgment, but one must be cautious about associates." Rachel heard the remark, as clearly as if it were spoken into her ear. Her pulse spiked. She paused at the edge of a table. A server lifted a tray of hors d'oeuvres, tiny skewers of melon and prosciutto. Rachel reached for one. The melon's sweetness momentarily eased her tension. Behind her, a group of board members turned to whisper. Their posture stiffened when they spotted her. One man cocked his head and raised an unseen eyebrow. She bit into the appetizer, its cool flavors grounding her. Nathaniel noticed her hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on her back. The touch was light, protective, but carried the tumult of his own uncertainty. He glanced toward the ballroom entrance, scanning for someone he trusted. He found Teresa's gaze across the room, her aunt standing with a distant cousin, poised and calm. Teresa nodded once, encouragingly. Rachel swallowed the last bite and matched Teresa's assurance with a tilt of her chin. They moved toward the center of the ballroom, where the MC, a polished event host in a tuxedo, had taken the microphone. Music softened, glasses stilled. Rachel felt as though she stood on a stage of scrutiny. The MC spoke of the Foundation's mission, of community outreach in Harlem and Queens, and of the woman who had stepped out of the shadows to help make it possible. Rachel's name rang out. A hush followed. Conversations halted. Forks hovered in midair. No one knew what to expect. Nathaniel's grip on her elbow tightened. "Go on," he murmured. "They're waiting for you." A fresh wave of anxiety swept through Rachel. Heat rose to her cheeks. She tried to steady her breath and blinked against the sudden glare of spotlights. The MC's words trailed off, expecting her to speak. She took a hesitant step onto the stage, the carpet warm beneath her feet. Each movement felt magnified. As she climbed the 3 steps to the lectern, a swirl of panic pressed at her chest. Memories of last night's confrontation and the misunderstanding in Suite 6001 swirled together. She recalled Nathaniel's apology in the archives room and the scholarship letter nestled in her pocket. She realized that every choice she had made led her here. She faced the sea of faces, donors in tuxedos, socialites in gowns, Teresa watching from the side with a quiet pride. She opened her mouth, but no words came at first. Then she remembered her mother's letter. "My hope is in you." She pressed her hand to her heart and spoke in a voice that trembled, yet carried. "Thank you for believing in our community," she said. "This foundation means more than grants and events. It means dignity for those who work hard and dream big." Her words rang across the room, gasps of surprise, nods of approval. A gentle wave of applause began at the back and rolled forward like the tide. Nathaniel exhaled, relief and pride mingling in his expression. He stood at the base of the stage, hands clasped, watching her claim her moment. As the applause subsided, a board director cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Rachel, we invited you here tonight not just as a symbol, but as a partner. Will you join our advisory council?" Rachel froze. The offer was far beyond her imagining. She felt the gravity of the question to cross fully into their world, to stand side by side with them, to be recognized for her worth. Her pulse thundered. She looked back at Nathaniel. He waited, his gaze steady, signaling that he meant every word. The room waited, every eye fixed on her. She took a breath, lifted her chin, and prepared to answer. The car pulled up to the entrance of a brownstone on the Upper East Side, just after sunset. The street lamps cast pools of golden light on the sidewalk, and the front door of Nathaniel's penthouse rose above 2 stoops, framed by ornate wrought iron. Rachel Moreno stepped out, holding the skirt of her loaned dress in one hand and her uniform blouse carefully folded in the other. She felt as though she were stepping onto another planet. The bell above the door tinkled as she entered into a vast foyer where marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. Nathaniel appeared beside her, offering a gentle hand on her elbow. He led her past a grand staircase of polished oak, its banister carved with delicate scrollwork. A glass wall beyond revealed a sweeping view of Central Park's dark silhouette against the halo of city lights. Inside, guests mingled in clusters, sipping champagne and exchanging polite laughter. Women in silk gowns and men in tailored suits turned to glance at Rachel as she followed Nathaniel down the hall. The hush of conversation lightened for a moment before resuming, as if her presence had already unsettled the evening's equilibrium. Nathaniel guided her toward the living area where a child sat cross-legged on an area rug, a small notepad in hand and colored pencils scattered around. The boy was no older than 8, with dark curls and earnest eyes. He sketched rapidly, his tongue caught between his lips in concentration. Rachel paused on the edge of the room, feeling every eye upon her uniform blouse draped over her arm. Nathaniel bent low to the child's level and smiled. "What are you drawing?" "Lucas." The boy looked up and grinned, holding out the notepad. The picture showed a poised woman in a Navy outfit standing beside a taller man in a suit, their hands almost touching. The lines were simple but expressive, capturing a sense of connection. Guests drifted closer, curious. One elderly gentleman in a tuxedo cleared his throat and offered a polite nod. Nathaniel took the sketch and said, "Look at this beautiful drawing." His voice carried across the room, warm with admiration. The crowd murmured appreciatively, and Rachel felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't expected recognition here, among New York's elite. The child's laughter rang out, clear and unguarded, and in that sound, Rachel found something like relief. She stepped forward, took the drawing, and met Nathaniel's eyes. The switch from uniform to borrowed dress left her feeling exposed. She smoothed the fabric at her waist and offered the child a gentle smile. Lucas beamed back and returned to his pencils. A woman in a sequin dress watched from a nearby sofa, her expression unreadable. Rachel wondered if she remembered seeing someone in a uniform at this address before a memory that might explain the scrutiny. As she turned toward the bar, a cluster of guests parted to let a catering tray pass. The scent of truffle canapes drifted by, and Rachel reached out to accept one, balancing it on a small plate. A wave of nerves washed over her, but she forced herself to chew slowly, focusing on the savory flavor. Nathaniel watched her with quiet intensity, as though gauging how the gathering's atmosphere affected her. She moved toward a marble-topped console beneath the glass wall. The city's lights stretched behind her like a blanket of stars. She lifted her glass of sparkling water to her lips and exhaled. Nathaniel joined her, offering a champagne flute. She hesitated, then took it, nodding her thanks. The bubbles tickled her throat, and she smiled at him in gratitude. He seemed relieved by the gesture, and for a moment they shared a private understanding she was no longer just Teresa's replacement, but a guest in his world. Before she could speak, a server in crisp black attire slipped behind her and leaned in to whisper into Nathaniel's ear. His gaze flickered, and he turned to Rachel with an apologetic smile. The server's words had unsettled him, though he kept his tone steady. He excused himself and walked across the room, leaving Rachel alone in the glow of city lights and soft music. She set down her glass and pulled her uniform blouse from her clutch, draping it carefully across her arm again. The borrowed dress felt suddenly fragile, a costume rather than a second skin. The laughter of guests mingled with snippets of conversation about charity goals and investment returns. Rachel inhaled, steadying herself. She realized that tonight's invitation had brought her deeper into Nathaniel's world than she had ever imagined. As she stepped toward the full-length windows, she caught the server's return. He hesitated at Nathaniel's side, glanced at her uniform blouse, and then spoke in a low voice. Nathaniel's expression tightened, curiosity and something sharper flickering across his features. The question hung between them, carried in the server's quiet tone, "Ms. Moreno." Could she be Teresa's granddaughter? She didn't look back, but he knew she would soon have to explain morning light filtered between the blinds of Rachel's Harlem apartment, painting stripes across her desk, where stacks of textbooks lay waiting. She blinked against the sun, memory of last night's fundraiser still humming in her mind. The borrowed dress, the child's drawing, the whisper at the penthouse door, everything felt unreal until her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, saw the Crosstech logo in her inbox, and hesitated before opening the email. The message came from an archived documents account, subject line, Teresa Delgado, Historical Records, Curious and Cautious. Rachel tapped the attachment, a PDF loaded showing a contract dated 15 years earlier. It was Teresa's original housekeeping agreement, printed on Crosstech letterhead, signed in careful script. Rachel scrolled down and discovered marginal notes in a different hand, referencing a development plan for Brooklyn Heights. One notation read, Project Red Oak, site clearance acquire properties on Stanton Street. Her pulse quickened when she saw the next file, an internal memo describing protests from residents whose homes were marked for demolition. Then she recognized Teresa's name again, this time under a headline, Incident Report, Stanton Street Concern. The report recounted a winter night when power lines sparked and threatened a building's collapse. Teresa, listed as maintenance staff at Bellevue Hospital, had guided emergency crews to a trapped family. The grateful family was identified as Cross Household. Rachel's breath caught. She scrolled up to the development plan documents and saw Nathaniel's father, Harrison Cross, listed as the project's lead. Stanton Street homes had fallen under eminent domain. Residents had been forced to relocate to make way for the Crosstech expansion into Brooklyn. The note read, Resettlement compensation allocated, case closed. But the compensation had arrived late. Some families lost generational homes. Teresa's family had been among the most affected, according to a social services log. Tremors ran through Rachel's hands as she read. The screen's glow mirrored in her wide eyes. She pressed her palm to her chest, recalling her parents' broken voices on the day they learned their rent assistance wouldn't cover a new lease. She had been only 8, but she remembered her mother's tears as they packed their belongings into a single suitcase. The betrayal still stung. How had Nathaniel remained so unaware? Her phone buzzed again. Nathaniel's name filled the screen. He initiated a video call, heart pounding. Rachel tapped, accept. His face appeared in the frame. The backdrop, his penthouse office overlooking the East River. He looked worn, guilt shadowing his sharp features. Rachel, he said, voice low. I saw you open the files. I'm sorry. Tears pricked her eyes. Sorry, she echoed. My family lost everything because of your father's project. Our home on Stanton Street gone. We barely found a place to stay. We missed the compensation deadline. You, Nathaniel, held up a hand. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. His eyes glistened. When I inherited Crosstech, I discovered that my father handled everything behind the scenes. He arranged payouts from a private fund I never saw. He insisted on secrecy to protect the company and my reputation. I only learned that Teresa was among those he tried to help years later in an old report. Rachel's chest tightened. You should have known before now. Rage and pain tangled in her throat. She stood and began to pace, the camera shaking with each step. You stood on that stage and praised me. You offered me a place on the advisory council. You used my story for goodwill. But you never told me that my aunt and my parents were victims of your empire. Nathaniel's shoulders slumped. I thought I was doing right by resurrecting her name through the foundation. I set up scholarships in Teresa's honor, community initiatives, but I never faced the truth that she and your family suffered because of Red Oak. I'm responsible for allowing her past to remain hidden. Rachel spun toward the window, the glass cool under her palm. Central Park's trees fluttered in spring bloom. She swallowed. Your good intentions don't undo the years we struggled. My mother died heartbroken. My father worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. She clenched her fists. You think a scholarship makes up for the home you erased, the childhood you stole? Nathaniel's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked away, as if unable to meet her gaze. The call stuttered with the weight of his silence. A small crack of light refracted off his office window behind him. For a moment, Rachel saw her Aunt Teresa standing in that same space, guiding young Nathaniel at Bellevue, saving a life without expectation. Teresa had acted on instinct, not for awards or recognition. "Help me understand," Nathaniel whispered, voice shaking. "Tell me what I can do." Rachel inhaled, chest tight with anger, sorrow, and something unexpected resignation. She shook her head and pressed end call. The screen went dark, leaving only the reflection of Harlem's skyline in her phone's glass. She didn't look back. But he remained on the screen, unable to speak as she walked away. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows in Nathaniel Cross's Park Avenue office. The space was hushed, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant click of keyboards from the open-plan floor below. He sat behind a long mahogany desk, shoulders slightly slumped. No suit jacket tonight, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His tie lay folded beside him. He rifled through a stack of philanthropic reports, eyes scanning rows of numbers and notes. He paused at a spreadsheet labeled Brooklyn Community Initiatives. A figure caught his attention, an unallocated amount reserved for Stanton Street scholarships, initiated 14 years ago. He leaned forward, opened a fresh document, and typed instructions to his assistant locate the current address of Rachel Moreno's family, coordinate with the New York City Department of Health's scholarship office, and finalize an award letter for a full tuition scholarship at Columbia University's medical school. He hesitated before pressing send, thumb brushing the keyboard. His chest tightened. "Do something meaningful," he murmured to himself, recalling the video call and Rachel's words. "What can you do?" He pushed back from the desk and walked across the room to the small kitchenette in the corner. He poured a glass of water, the ice clicking softly, and stared out at the midtown skyline. Below, cars traced lines of traffic, and people hurried to evening engagements. Meanwhile, in her Harlem apartment, Rachel Moreno sat at her desk, surrounded by textbooks. The late afternoon sun painted her notes in shades of gold. She reached for her chewed-on pen and tapped it against her notebook. Sleep had been elusive since the revelations about her family's past. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the new email notification and frowned when she saw the sender Crosstech Foundation. She clicked open the message. A PDF attachment displayed a letter on Crosstech Foundation letterhead. The header read, "Congratulations, Rachel A. Moreno." Beneath it was the official offer of full scholarship to Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons to commence in September. The letter was signed in elegant script by Nathaniel Cross. Her breath caught in her throat. She read the words again, slowly. A full scholarship. All fees covered. Room and board. She set the tablet aside and stared at the ceiling. A roar of emotions flooded her disbelief. Suspicion. Resentment. Her fingers closed around the pen. She thought of the years her parents had struggled to keep food on the table and rent paid after Stanton Street collapsed under Project Red Oak's bulldozers. She thought of her Aunt Teresa, cleaning rooms at the Celestia to keep a roof over their heads. This scholarship felt like a lifeline and a bargain wrapped into one. She pushed away from the desk and retrieved the tablet. Her finger hovered over the accept offer link. A single click would bind her to the terms. She closed her eyes, tight, and whispered, "Is this your way of buying my silence?" Her heart pounded. She tapped the link, and a form appeared for her signature. She scrawled her name with deliberate strokes, the pen gliding across the screen. With each letter, her chest loosened. She felt gratitude war with anger, and at last, she exhaled a shaky sigh. The confirmation screen displayed scholarship accepted. Welcome to the Crosstech family. Below. Another email awaited. Rachel tapped the inbox again. The new message was brief and urgent. Please join me in fundraising room B on the 12th floor at 9 a.m. tomorrow to discuss program details. Nathaniel Cross. Her pulse quickened. An in-person meeting meant more than a letter. It meant he wanted to speak face to face. She rose and paced, smoothing her skirt. Shadows from the building next door stretched across her hardwood floor. She felt the weight of what lay ahead to step into Nathaniel's world again, to confront him directly. She folded the tablet, slipped it into her backpack, and gathered her books. The air in her apartment felt charged, as though the walls themselves awaited her decision. She hesitated at the door, glanced back at the quiet room where ambition battled with distrust. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Tomorrow. She would face him and decide what it meant to accept his restitution. She didn't look back, but he knew she would have questions to ask. Rachel stepped into the Cross Foundation's conference room on the ground floor of the Celestia, feeling the weight of every eye on her student blazer and pencil skirt. The warm glow of overhead sconces softened the room's jade-green walls and the long mahogany table that stretched between bookcases lined with hardcover policy reports. Nathaniel stood at the head of the table, his dark hair slightly mussed, sleeves rolled up to reveal watchful forearms. He offered a nod of greeting, his face composed yet earnest. An assistant closed the heavy oak door behind Rachel, and the soft click left only the hum of a distant ventilation system. Nathaniel cleared his throat and advanced to a projection screen behind him. He pressed a remote, and a title slide appeared, Community Health Education Initiative. The room shifted as he began to speak, his voice measured, free of corporate polish. He described plans to refurbish a rundown clinic on Stanton Street, install training equipment for EMT volunteers, and launch mobile health vans in Bedford-Stuyvesant. He outlined budgets for teaching materials, mental health workshops, and free immunization drives. As he walked through each phase, Rachel watched the faces of board members light with recognition, but her heart thundered with conflicting emotions. She listened to numbers and timelines, but her thoughts drifted to the video footage Nathaniel had shown her in the archives, Teresa guiding rescuers at Bellevue, steadying a bleeding child before her shift began. That memory had cut through her anger like a blade, carving out a space for something more complex than resentment. Now she observed Nathaniel inviting the audience to see value in service rather than station. She felt a flutter of empathy for his attempt to bring a light into darkness. When Nathaniel paused the presentation and turned toward her, the room quieted. He met her gaze directly. His next words were simple, but they resonated through the hush. I was wrong to let my family's past remain in darkness. Today, I want to share that light with you. His admission landed like a soft echo. Rachel's chest tightened, her pulse pounding against her ribs. She inhaled slowly, reminding herself that she had agreed to this meeting to seek truth, not vengeance. She saw in Nathaniel's eyes the same regret she had felt for years, the ache of realizing too late the cost of silence. Nathaniel pressed the remote again, and the screen flickered to life with a video clip. It showed Teresa Delgado in a hospital corridor, her housekeeping uniform spotless in the fluorescent glow. A young boy lay on a stretcher, panic in his tears. Teresa knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his forehead to calm him, her voice measured, soothing. She guided a nurse to his side and stayed back just long enough to ensure he was safe before slipping away. The clip ended with the boy's mother embracing Teresa's shoulder, gratitude shining in her eyes. Nathaniel's shoulders sagged, and tears welled in his eyes. He swallowed hard, voice catching as he spoke. That moment changed my family. It showed me that compassion could come from anywhere, from anyone. Teresa didn't wait for recognition. She acted because it was right. He wiped his eyes and leaned on the podium, rebuilding his composure. I want this foundation to honor that legacy. A murmur of approval rose among the board members, but Rachel remained still, absorbing the revelation. Seeing her aunt's kindness replayed shifted something inside her. It reminded her of the courage Teresa had passed down, the quiet acts that spoke louder than any apology. She felt her resentment soften into understanding, the beginning of something like forgiveness. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, the conference room door opened quietly. An assistant entered, holding a thick envelope tied with a cream ribbon. She approached Nathaniel and placed it on the table before him. Nathaniel glanced down, confusion flickering across his features. He lifted the envelope and studied its handwriting in a familiar hand, gentle, flowing cursive. He looked up at Rachel, eyebrows raised. The room held its breath. On a bright spring morning, Bedford-Stuyvesant awoke to a new energy as residents gathered before a red ribbon stretched across the entrance of a renovated brownstone on Green Avenue. The building's facade bore a freshly painted sign Moreno Cross Health Initiative. Once a boarded-up storefront, it now gleamed under the soft glow of decorative sconces, its windows revealing a welcoming reception area and hallways painted in warm earth tones. Children perched on curbs in neatly pressed uniforms from nearby Booker T. Washington Elementary, clutching paper fans printed with the initiative's logo, while older neighbors leaned on walkers at the edges of the crowd, shields against the early sun. Rachel Moreno stood beside Nathaniel Cross at the ribbon's midpoint, scissors in hand. Her heart thrummed with joy and disbelief. A year ago, she had scrubbed floors at the Celestia. Today, she prepared to open a community health center named after her family's legacy and Nathaniel's philanthropy. Memories of Stanton Street flashed through her mind, the days of housing demolition, her mother's tears, the uncertainty that had followed. Now, in the faces before her, she saw hope replacing hardship. Nathaniel offered a reassuring squeeze on her arm. He wore a tailored suit, softened by the absence of a tie, his eyes bright with pride. Across the street, a local reporter from the Brooklyn Daily glided through the crowd, notepad in hand and camera ready, while a group of EMT volunteers in matching Navy jackets stood by tables heaped with first aid kits and pamphlets. A brass band from the nearby church tuned its instruments on the sidewalk, ready to play in celebration. A hush fell as the mayor stepped onto the makeshift stage beside the entrance. She tapped the microphone and announced the center's mission: free health screenings, maternal support services, vaccination clinics, and educational workshops. Her words carried weight because she, too, had grown up blocks away. She praised the collaboration between Rachel and Nathaniel as a model of how diverse communities could bridge centuries of privilege and disadvantage. As she spoke, she gestured toward the center, its glass doors reflecting the sea of faces. Applause rolled like thunder down the avenue, echoing off brownstone walls. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she gripped the silver handles of the ceremonial scissors. She inhaled the scent of fresh lilies and hot asphalt, the sounds of celebration mingling with the scent of coffee from a food truck parked nearby. She glanced at Nathaniel, whose smile reached his eyes, and together they raised the scissors in perfect unison and cut the ribbon. A burst of cheers greeted them as the ribbon fell away. Children ran forward to line up at the reception desk, where volunteers offered free medical kits and canvas bags stamped with the initiative's name. A boy in a pair of dungarees tugged at Rachel's hand and asked if she would show him where the clinic rooms were. She laughed softly, guided him through the door, and felt a swell of warmth as his friends crowded behind him, all chattering excitedly. Across the street, two elderly residents, Mr. Lewis and Mrs. Hernandez, stepped forward with canes in hand. They joined hands and leaned on each other as they approached Rachel. Mr. Lewis cleared his throat and said, his voice quavering with emotion, "We never thought we'd see this day in East Flatbush. Thank you." Mrs. Hernandez pressed a wrinkled hand against her heart and smiled through tears. Rachel knelt to add a gentle hug, absorbing the gratitude that had once been denied her family. Nathaniel watched, his chest rising and falling with relief and pride. He caught Rachel's eye and leaned close. "We did this together," he whispered. His words anchored her soaring spirit, and she reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. They stood side by side at the threshold of the center, the crowd's applause swelling around them like a tide. Behind them, the brass band launched into a jubilant march, balloons in blue and gold. Crosstex colors floated above the street. A line of tents sheltered tables where families signed up for health workshops. One tent offered free dental checkups, another distributed flu shots. At the corner, a local chef dished out hot soup to the boxed lunches offered by a nearby shelter ministry. The sounds of laughter and conversation blended with the notes of the band, composing a melody of renewal. Just as the morning sun reached its zenith, Nathaniel slipped a hand into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small velvet box. He hesitated, catching Rachel's gaze as she knelt beside a volunteer, teaching a young mother how to use a blood pressure cuff. The volunteer looked up and smiled at Rachel, who returned the warmth. Then Nathaniel stepped forward, clearing his throat to gather attention. The crowd slowed, sensing something personal was about to unfold. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace shaped like a heart, its surface engraved with the words, "Thank you, Rachel." A hush fell. Rachel rose, heart pounding, as Nathaniel held the necklace toward her. He spoke quietly but with conviction. "Your courage built this place. This is to remind you that your compassion is the true gift." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rachel's breath caught. She clasped a hand to her chest and felt tears gather again, not from sorrow, but from the profound sense of being seen. She accepted the necklace, her fingers brushing his. A soft glow of sunlight struck the engraving, and the inscription shimmered against her uniform blouse, now swapped for the crisp blouse she had folded neatly. Her voice trembled as she addressed the people around them. "This center belongs to all of us. May it stand as proof that together, we can heal old wounds and build stronger futures." Applause rose once more, and the crowd swarmed forward to share the moment. She didn't look back, but he knew. This was only the beginning. Rachel stepped into the grand ballroom at the Celestia, clutching the velvet box Nathaniel had given her. The gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers showered the polished marble floor with light. Golden reflections danced across silver platters heaped with smoked salmon canapes. Waiters in black vests weaved among guests, holding trays of champagne flutes that chimed like bells when offered. A string quartet played softly in a corner under a large portrait of the hotel's founder. The air was thick with perfume and polite conversation. She felt her heart flutter as she joined Nathaniel near the stage, draped in ivory silk. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo jacket over a crisp white shirt, his hand still gently holding hers. Across the room, Aunt Teresa stepped forward onto the small raised platform. Her navy dress was simple, the fabric unadorned, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity. The chatter subsided as she raised a hand for silence. A hush fell so deep that the quartet's final chord lingered in midair. Teresa cleared her throat, eyes bright behind wire-rimmed glasses. She scanned the faces before her, lingering on Nathaniel and then on Rachel, who stood with a small smile, excitement and nerves mingling in her chest. Teresa's voice was soft but unwavering as she began. She told them of 20 years earlier, the night a young boy named Nathaniel Cross had arrived at Bellevue Hospital after a car accident. The corridors were emptying for the night. Only emergency lights glowed above the linoleum floors. She had been the maintenance attendant on duty, pushing a mop bucket and humming an old lullaby under her breath. She described the boy's fear, eyes wide with panic, and his mother's trembling hands. She spoke of how she dropped her mop and guided the woman and her son through locked doors to the trauma unit, steadying the mother's hand as paramedics worked. She recounted how the boy had clung to her uniform jacket, small fingers wrapped in fear and trust, and how she had knelt beside him until the surgeon's voice told her he would live. Her hands had been shaking for hours afterward, and she returned to the laundry room, tears in her eyes, knowing she had done something more than her job required. As she spoke, Rachel felt her vision blur with tears. She had heard tales of her aunt's generosity, but never realized the depth of her courage or the way Teresa's actions had rippled through time. Nathaniel stood beside Rachel, his throat tight, eyes shimmering. He squeezed Rachel's hand and swallowed hard. Board members and donors watched in silence, their expressions shifting from polite interest to rapt attention. Teresa paused, glancing down at a folded piece of paper in her hand. She unfolded it and read aloud the child's thank you letter she had kept hidden all these years. "Dear Teresa, you saved my life. I don't know who you are, but I will never forget your kindness." The ballroom remained silent, except for the quiet rustle of her paper. Then she looked up and smiled directly at Nathaniel. The revelation landed like a soft thunderclap. Guests gasped. Some covered their mouths. A ripple of hushed exclamations passed through the crowd: gratitude, astonishment, admiration. Teresa's decision to act on instinct rather than duty, to guide strangers through locked doors when no one ordered her to, now explained the foundation's name and purpose. It showed how compassion could transcend class and position. Just as applause began to rise like waves on the marble floor, a board director stepped forward, his expression serious beneath silver hair. He held a program booklet in one hand. His voice was low, but carried in the hush. Such a personal history complicates our fundraising efforts. We must discuss whether it's appropriate to merge family ties with foundation governance. A murmur followed his words, admiration for Teresa's act, now tinged with unease over tradition and protocol. Guests glanced at one another, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Nathaniel's face paled. Rachel felt a chill creep up her spine. The director's statement hovered between admiration and doubt, as if the foundation's strength lay both in personal connection and in adherence to impersonal rules. The tension shifted the mood, turning triumph into a question of right and wrong, of family versus formality. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, while others stared at Teresa with new respect, demanding clarity. Nathaniel pressed his lips together, trying to conceal his conflict. Rachel felt a flash of resolve stir within her. The moment had turned sudden and precarious. The foundation's heart, born of Teresa's fearless compassion, now faced its greatest test. Would they choose transparency and gratitude, or would protocol and fear of scandal override the truth? She didn't look back, but he knew the next words would decide their future. A week later, rain drummed softly against the glass walls of Crosstech headquarters as Rachel stepped into the boardroom. The room perched high above Manhattan, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a panorama of steel and concrete slivers of Central Park. A long, polished oak table dominated the space, surrounded by black leather chairs. At its head sat Nathaniel Cross, his suit jacket laid over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled up as though he had been laboring long into the night. Board members filed in one by one, expressions guarded. The director who had interrupted the gala held a leather-bound folder and exchanged nods with colleagues before taking the seat opposite Nathaniel. A hush settled as everyone found their places. The hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound until Nathaniel looked toward Rachel and gestured for her to join him at the table. Her stomach tightened as she took the empty chair beside him. She smoothed her blazer, inhaled, and fixed her gaze on the director who had first spoken. He cleared his throat. "We appreciate the initiative's success," he began, voice measured. "But the board must consider fiduciary responsibility. We cannot risk the appearance of nepotism by blurring family ties with governance." He paused and tapped his folder. "Ms. Moreno's relationship to Ms. Delgado raises questions about impartiality. We must ensure this foundation operates on objective merit, not personal connection." Rachel felt her pulse pound. She studied Nathaniel's tense profile, jaw set, shoulders squared, as if he braced for a storm. She drew in a slow breath and stood. The boardroom's high ceiling and open view of the city seemed to recede, leaving her with only the long table and skeptical eyes. "I understand your concern," she said, voice calm but unwavering. "But Teresa's involvement and my scholarship are not about family advantage. They stand for the community we serve together." A murmur erupted along the table as she spoke. She turned to face them fully, hands resting lightly on the table's edge. "I accept the scholarship on merit. I earned it through grades and interviews. Teresa did her job because she cared, and I volunteer because I believe in service. Our names happen to connect us, but our work stands on its own." Silence followed her words. The director leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Prove it," he said. Nathaniel rose and crossed to the projection screen. He clicked the remote, and slides appeared showing data from the past 6 months in Bedford-Stuyvesant community health screenings, up by 40%. Childhood immunization rates restored to 90% after years of decline. Attendance at mobile clinic workshops doubling. A chart displayed follow-up surveys with patients reporting improved trust in medical care. Photos of neighbors' parents, seniors, children smiling beside volunteers accompanied each metric. He turned to the board. "This initiative has already transformed lives," he said, voice steady. "Rachel's leadership, her lived experience, gives us credibility we could never buy. When she speaks to a mother worried about prenatal care, She speaks from a place of understanding. That builds trust faster than any marketing campaign. He advanced to a slide listing local donations from small businesses that had joined the effort after witnessing community impact. Rachel watched board members shift in their seats, eyes narrowing or relaxing as they absorbed each fact. She felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. Nathaniel returned to his seat beside her, his presence solid. She caught his glance, saw relief mixed with determination. But just as momentum seemed to swing in their favor, the finance chair, a stern woman in pearls, reached across the table and slid a crisp white envelope toward Nathaniel. The paper was thick, unmarked, except for a single initial, scrawled in elegant script, D.A.R. Nathaniel paused, hand hovering, before he lifted the envelope. His brow furrowed. He glanced at the director, then at the chairwoman. The boardroom's soft hum of expectation turned electric. Rachel leaned forward, unsettled. Nathaniel broke the seal and drew out a folded letter, his eyes scanning the first line. Color drained from his face. He looked up, mouth slightly open, eyes wide as he took in what he read. A single bead of sweat slid down his temple. The silence in the room pressed around them like a vice. He traced the letter's text with trembling fingers, eyes flicking from the page to Rachel and back. The finance chair's lips thinned in a knowing half-smile, her message delivered not in metrics, but in mystery. Nathaniel straightened, and the letter trembled in his grip. He did not speak. He did not move. The data, the charts, the heartfelt testimony all seemed suspended in that moment between what had been said and what was now revealed. The city skyline outside blurred in the shifting light, waiting for his next words to break the tension. The envelope trembled slightly in Nathaniel's hand as he unfolded the stark white paper in the center of the boardroom table. Outside, Manhattan's skyline gleamed under a late afternoon sun. Inside, the board members sat motionless, their reflections mirrored in the glass walls. Rachel sat to Nathaniel's right, heart pounding in her chest. The message was brief and cold. A multi-million-dollar pledge would be withdrawn unless he severed ties with anyone outside his executive circle. The donor's name was not signed. The threat stood on its own authority. Nathaniel's voice shook as he read the final line aloud. Please understand our terms, or we must withdraw our commitment. He lowered the letter, sliding it toward the finance chair with measured calm. The room held its breath. Rachel's pulse echoed in her ears. She looked at Nathaniel, waiting for him to speak. The finance chair, a woman in pearls and a tailored suit, leaned forward, her lips pressed into a thin line. She tapped her pen on the table, eyes flicking between Nathaniel and Rachel. This is serious, she said quietly. Losing that pledge could cripple our funding for years. Rachel's stomach twisted. She felt the weight of the community back in Brooklyn, of children waiting for free health screenings and pregnant mothers counting on prenatal programs. Yet she also saw Nathaniel's jaw tighten, his gaze refusing to waver. He straightened in his chair and drew a slow breath. I refuse, he said, voice low but firm. The words rippled through the room. Our mission must not bow to fear or prejudice. If a gift comes with strings that betray our values, then I will find support elsewhere. Silence stretched as board members processed his declaration. Their faces were impassive until a faint nod rippled across the table. The finance chair cleared her throat, then exhaled. Then I'm with you, she said softly, one by one. Others met Nathaniel's gaze and offered their assent. The director who had warned of nepotism gave a small, approving nod. A surge of relief washed through Rachel. She felt the tension in her shoulders melt as the board's confidence in principle overtook concern for dollars. In that moment, the foundation's true purpose crystallized. It was not about wealth or status, but about community and integrity. Nathaniel reached across the table and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of months of struggle and misunderstanding. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Beside them, the board members leaned forward, their chairs scraping softly against the marble floor as they settled into renewed commitment. A board member at the far end of the table rose to speak, his voice brightening with determination. In light of this decision, he said, we will launch a public campaign celebrating community advocates who embody the spirit of service. Ms. Moreno, we invite you to serve as lead ambassador. His announcement prompted soft applause, and eyes turned to Rachel with respect and admiration rather than curiosity or doubt. Rachel rose, her knees steady beneath her. The room brightened around her as she accepted the role. She envisioned posters and billboards bearing her image alongside neighbors and volunteers, teachers, nurses, and family members whose quiet acts of kindness had once gone unnoticed. She realized that the foundation could now champion true collaboration, giving voice to the very people it served. Nathaniel stood with her, offering a shared smile. In that shared moment, their partnership transcended roles of CEO and assistant. They were co-creators of a vision rooted in honesty and compassion. As the meeting concluded, Rachel gathered her things, the late afternoon light slanting across her papers. She paused by the glass wall overlooking the city below, thinking of Stanton Street's empty lots and the hope now flourishing in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Nathaniel approached and slipped an arm around her shoulders, wordless support. Her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. She drew it out and saw a text from Columbia University's admissions office. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. Congratulations, Ms. Moreno. Your scholarship has been fast-tracked for full funding and research support. Details to follow. A stunned silence fell around her as she shared the news with Nathaniel. His eyes lit with pride and astonishment. In that instant, the journey that began with misunderstanding and injustice found its resolution recognition earned through courage and integrity. She didn't look back, but he knew. Their future was only just beginning. 6 months later, Rachel stood at a podium beneath the restored garden terrace of the Celestia. The setting sun cast long rays of copper light across marble fountains that burbled softly, their ivory stone worn smooth by months of children leaning over to watch the fish. Planting beds once choked with weeds now bloomed with lavender and rosemary, tended by community volunteers on crisp Saturday mornings. A circle of folding chairs faced the podium, filled with neighbors, donors, and workshop instructors, young mothers who had learned prenatal care there, senior citizens who now practiced chair yoga in the shaded alcove. Rachel's heart pounded as she adjusted the microphone. The clinking of glasses and murmured greetings dimmed into respectful silence. She opened her speech with a steady voice. Tonight, we honor the bridge between unlikely allies. Behind her, ivy climbed latticework framing the view of Midtown skyline, where glass towers shimmered like jewels against the dusk. Her gaze drifted to the people she had come to know: Marcus, the barber who provided free clipper cuts to seniors, Aisha, the nursing student who led evening health literacy classes, and Richard, an EMT whose station on Wilson Street now dispatched mobile clinic calls. Nathaniel sat in the front row, suit jacket draped over his arm, watching her with a soft expression. She told the story of a chance meeting in a presidential suite on a stormy night, how a student in uniform had been mistaken for something she was not, sparking years of misunderstanding and shame. She spoke of her Aunt Teresa's quiet intervention at Bellevue Hospital, of trust broken and mended, and of the struggle to turn pain into purpose. She described the moments of doubt standing alone in a lavish ballroom, reading old contracts in Harlem by morning light, and the small victories, a community photo posted in the cafe, a donation from a local bodega, the first child to walk into the center, clutching a teddy bear. When she concluded, her voice trembled with emotion. A hush settled before applause broke like waves against the terrace walls. Hands clapped and cheers rose, echoing through the planter boxes and beyond. Rachel felt tears blur her vision, not tears of sorrow, but of triumph and connection. She pressed a hand to her chest as the crowd's energy swelled. Nathaniel rose and joined her at the podium. He held a small wooden box carved with intertwined circles. His fingers brushed the lid before lifting it to reveal a delicate bronze sculpture, two hands clasped firmly, fingers interwoven in solidarity. He smiled, voice gentle amid the celebration. "I once searched for luxury," he said, but my heart was conquered by something far greater, a woman whose strength was the gift itself. His words settled over the garden like a benediction. From the edge of the crowd, Aunt Teresa moved forward, a framed letter in her hands. The golden light caught the glass and illuminated elegant cursive. She held it aloft, the audience parting respectfully as she took the stage beside Nathaniel and Rachel. With a steady voice, she read the note she had penned 2 decades earlier to a young patient at Bellevue. "Compassion is the legacy we leave behind." Her words floated through the garden, connecting past to present. A cheer erupted as Teresa handed the letter to Rachel. Neighbors applauded, some wiping tears from their eyes. The sculpture caught the last rays of sun, its 2 hands casting long shadows across the marble floor. Rachel and Nathaniel lifted it together, their fingers brushing against the cool metal. The sound of applause and laughter mingled with the fountain's murmur and the rustle of lavender blossoms. They did not need to be the same to stand together. They only needed to look toward the same horizon. The evening light still caught the faint gleam of a polished doorknob long after the last guest had left. In that soft glow, the line between who we think we are and who we truly can be felt a little thinner. Trust often grows not from grand declarations, but from the quiet acts that bridge our differences. In moments when assumptions fall away, a space opens for something unexpected to take root. We carry our past with us. And yet, each new glance offers a chance to look again. In that gentle pause between what is and what could be, the future whispers its promise. What will you choose to see when the next light turns on?